all of us have experienced some sort of catastrophic event when it comes to cutting or holes in your knitting. Maybe you had a run in a pair of tights that was really embarrassing, or a hole in a t-shirt that just looked kind of ratty, or maybe it was your knitting project that had something bad happen to it. Whether it was a helpful toddler with a pair of scissors, or a kitten or a puppy just making an absolute mess out of a project, we've all kind of come to fear scissors around our knitting. That kind of fear is what keeps a lot of people away from Steeks, and I have to say I get it. There is nothing worse than having something unexpected and seemingly unfixable happen to your knitting project. The idea of cutting your knitting on purpose seems like a little bit much, but cutting your knitting strategically is actually really helpful and can speed up a lot of processes in knitting for you. So today, let's take the EEK out of Steeks. The word steek comes from the Middle English stecken, meaning to close or fasten something together. In knitting, a steek is a set of stitches that holds two sides together temporarily until you're ready to cut them apart. This lets you work more quickly in the round. This is especially helpful anytime you don't want to purl, or if knitting back and forth would slow you down, like with stranded colorwork. Stranded colorwork is the #1 place that hand knitters tend to use a steek. You'll use a steek when you want to knit in the round, but you have a pattern that requires openings in certain places. This could be for a cardigan, where you want an opening in the center front. It could be for necklines. You create a V-neck or other shaped neck with a steek cut in the center. You could use it for armhole openings or shoulder seams, and you could also use it for other projects like blankets and scarves. To set up a steek, you'll add at least 7 stitches to the stitch count wherever you have your steek. So if you have a single steek for a cardigan front, you're going to add at least 7 stitches. If you have a steek for each armhole, you're going to add 7 stitches at each armhole. You could add more, 7, 9, 11, but you'll notice that we typically are adding steeks in odd numbers. This is because you're going to cut that center stitch, so having an even number of stitches on the other side of that cut is going to balance everything out. If you're using steeks in colorwork, which is kind of the most common use for them, you're going to alternate your colors around the steek so that you can easily identify where it is. You can either do this by making a checkerboard pattern or by columns of stitches. I prefer the columns because it's easier for me to see when I'm cutting. Whichever method you choose, this is also going to keep that knitting more stable around the cut, so you have this extra little security blanket from alternating those colors. When I'm planning to use the steeking method but without stranded color work, say I'm making a cardigan and I want to cut the center front but it's all one color, I will actually use a purl stitch as that center stitch. That makes it easy to know where to cut. So far so good, right? We haven't actually cut anything yet, we're just knitting. But once we've gotten through the whole project and we're ready to cut, what happens now? Well, you don't have to reinforce your steek stitches. I know this comes as kind of a surprise to a lot of people, but knitting doesn't actually want to unravel along that vertical length. Normally when knitting unravels, it's along the stitches as you knit them, side to side, but we're cutting perpendicular to that. So you don't actually have to reinforce a steek, especially if you're working with traditional wools that are typically used in steeks. We're talking sticky Shetland wool, Icelandic wool, things that are really grabby and already act like Velcro. They're not going to want to unravel. So you don't even have to do anything. You could just cut. And that's actually what I do probably about 80% of the time. However, you are dealing with a seam that's going to see a lot of stress. Maybe it's an armhole seam, or you just really want to reinforce it. There are a couple of things you could do. The first method is a crochet reinforcement. This crochets together with a single crochet 2 lines of stitches on either side of the steek. This is pretty helpful and stable, and I have used it on occasion. And if I'm worried about the stability of my cut, I will use this method. The other method is to use a sewing machine to really reinforce, nail down those stitches so that they're not going to go anywhere. I don't love this method because while it sounds fast and easy, it actually requires some extra care. You need to make sure that you're not stretching out your knitting as it runs through the sewing machine, and that's actually easier said than done. If you want to use your sewing machine, I'd recommend a walking foot if you have access to one, or just being really careful not to stretch out your stitches. If you stretch out your stitches as you sew them down, you're going to end up with a ruffled edge, and this is going to be a lot harder to hide later on, and it's just not going to look good. Where I do recommend the sewing machine method is with fibers that you wouldn't traditionally see in a steek. This is going to be your superwash wools, your non-wools like cotton, or fiber blends that you're just not sure how they're going to behave. No matter what you do, I really don't recommend a steek on something extra slippery like silk or rayon, although feel free to try it and see how it behaves. Once your steek is cut, you are going to have 2 edges that are raw, and again, depending on how you need this cut edge to function or appear, or how anxious you are about it, you have several options for what you're going to do next. The first option is to do nothing, just continue on. A lot of times your steeked edge is going to have something knitted onto it or sewn onto it, and that edge can hide in the seams. If you're dealing with a fiber that is traditionally cut and steeked, like a Shetland or Icelandic wool that's nice and sticky, over time it's just going to kind of felt together with its neighbors, and it'll be perfectly secure as is. If you're really kind of worried about it or you don't like the look of it, you might just whip stitch down that edge, and you'd be surprised how good that is at securing the edge and making sure that it's not going to go anywhere. If you really want to hide that, maybe it's for a blanket, or you really don't like the appearance of that raw edge, you can sew down a ribbon or some other decorative trim to hide it. This is something that's going to add a little bit of bulk, and it's going to prevent your knitting from stretching. So I find that it's best used on edges that don't need any stretch, or that would even benefit from a little bit of extra stability. This would be button bands, shoulder edges, or the edges of blankets. It's really not great for things that are going to need to stretch, like armholes. The fourth method is what's called a steek sandwich. This is a knit on facing. You'll pick up stitches along the edge of your steek, and you're going to knit a little pocket for them. So you knit in one direction, and then you pick up stitches that are formed by the loops of the stitches that you picked up, and you knit up another edge, and then you bind them off together. It's the method that I used for this jacket, and I have to say it's not my favorite. It adds a significant amount of bulk. So again, it's going to be best on cardigan edges and blanket edges. It's not going to be so great on armhole edges. I also find that it's kind of a lot of work. I find it much easier to just sew on a ribbon edge, and it's a lot easier. But if you don't have the ribbon on hand and you've got the yarn on hand, I could definitely see why the steek sandwich would be the preferred method. So if that's something that you want to explore a little bit more, that resource will be below. Once secured your steek stitches, you are good to go. You will have cut your knitting and seen how it went. I really hope that this has helped you take the eek out of steeks. I really encourage you to give steeks a try. They are really fun, and they give you a lot of opportunities and options for working with your knitting that you might not have thought about before. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.